On July 20th, 2011, the UN declared a famine in southern Somalia, affecting some 3.1 million people, and an estimated 500,000 children were malnourished. Famine is defined technically as a situation where acute malnutrition rates among children exceed 30%. More than 2 people per 10,000 die per day, and people are not able to access food and other basic necessities. In this video, I'll look at the main causes of famine in Somalia and evaluate the impact of each one. Drought. There is no question that the drought that affected the entire region was a major trigger of the famine. Rainfall during the Dare season in late 2010 in many areas of the Greater Horn was at the lowest recorded level in 50 years. As you can see in this graphic, which depicts a normalized difference vegetation index, NDVI, how dry Somalia was in December 2010. The NDVI is an index reflecting vegetative growth from remote sensing data after the failure of the Dare rains. Note that the Dare season is the rainy season. This graphic gives us a rough indication of the impact of the drought on both crop production and grazing and water resources for livestock. Note that the more solid red areas roughly correspond to areas declared famine. Food prices. Though less publicized than the drought, of equal importance in triggering the famine was the simultaneous steep climb in the price of food globally. Somalia is a country that is heavily dependent on food imports. This graph depicts the price of basic food grains in different locations in Somalia. Food prices peaked in June and July, just about the time famine was declared. This was not a local phenomenon brought about by the failure of the Dare harvest. The trends in this graph are broadly indicative of global prices, though. Also, the combination of the loss of animals and declining rural labour opportunities contributed to a rapid decline in rural income precisely at the time that the food prices were escalating. Conflict in governance. The biggest underlying factor of all of this is the inability of Somalia's government and donors to tackle the country's chronic poverty, which has marginalised vulnerable people and weakened their ability to cope. There has been a lack of investment in social services and basic infrastructure and a lack of good governance. Not only was the governance of its people in a bad state, but the ongoing and unresolved conflict in Somalia also contributed highly. In the run-up to and during the famine, the fighting did not particularly intensify, but there were restrictions on movement and access, in some cases forced movement. This constant movement and separation from long-term residences prevents engagement with and investments in livelihoods. The impact of conflict on famine has long been noticed, but Somalia from 2011 to 2012 offers new insights into several factors, including the role of global war on terror and counterinsurgency legislation. It was not a coincidence that the area affected by famine was the area controlled by the Al-Shabaab insurgency. Civilian displacement was a major problem. In fact, it was probably at the highest level since the 1990 and 1992 war that helped trigger the previous famine. The regional and global dimensions of the conflict not only complicated the conflict, it vastly complicated the prospect for mitigating and responding to the famine. Al-Shabaab had also slowly tightened its grip over southern Somalia and its population, with much tighter restrictions on humanitarian agencies. To conclude, the famine affected large areas of southern Somalia in 2011 and was caused by several factors, including the drought, rising food prices, and conflict. With the absence of major humanitarian actors, with local governments by an insurgent group that did not want humanitarian assistance, and especially food aid, and with counter-terrorism laws in donor countries that further restricted the action of humanitarian agencies, a famine seemed all inevitable in retrospect. Overall, although food prices and drought were catalysts for the famine, the underlying factor was the governance of Somalia and the widespread conflict.